Tuesday, 5 July 2022. In my earlier Skidmark, I spoke about the many warnings that were issued about the dangers of NATO expansion. And in this one, I want to focus on the warning from China. And this warning is, to me, quite impressive. This is a non-Western country. It's a non-Western guy. But listen carefully to what he is saying. And it all started off, I got onto this by a tweet from Arnoud Bertrand on Twitter. Chinese experts also saw it coming long ago. This is Xiping Tang, one of China's foremost international relations scholars, writing in 2009. Now, it is 2009, it's a long time ago. And it is also a long time before this fiasco between Russia and Ukraine. But the reality is, there were already serious warnings from various sources about Ukraine and NATO. Unfortunately, joining NATO is not even in Ukraine's long-term interest. The hard reality is that if NATO wants to pull Ukraine into their alliance and Ukraine's Russophobic elite wants to escape from geography by allying with NATO, the Russian population in Ukraine may want secession. Once it happens, civil war and then a partition of Ukraine along the ethnic geographical divide is not an impossibility. And when it comes to push and shove, NATO and US may still stand by, just as they have done in Georgia. No sane US and EU leader will risk a war with a nuclear Russia if Russia decides that it wants to partition Ukraine under the pretext of intervening in a civil war that kills ethnic Russians in Ukraine. How much prophecy is in this? And the guy is explaining exactly what happened. And this was in 2009. And 5 years later, the reality of his words came true. And the ethnic Russians voted to get out of Ukraine. And that triggered the Ukraine government from starting that, what we can call it, nothing else than an ethnic civil war in the east of Ukraine. And the east of Ukraine is the biggest majority there, the overwhelming majority there is Russians. And this guy points it out. To me, what is actually stunning is where he makes the statement. And when it comes to, this sentence is important. The Russian population in Ukraine may want secession. Once it happens, civil war and then a partition of Ukraine's along ethnic geographical divide is not an impossibility. And that is exactly what happened there. Exactly what happened there. And then this last sentence. If Russia decides that it wants to partition Ukraine under the pretext of intervening in a civil war that kills ethnic Russians in Ukraine. And that is exactly what happened. To the point. One would think this guy is clairvoyant. A neutral Ukraine backed by the EU and Russia thus also demands Ukraine to commit herself to live peacefully with Russia. No country can escape from geography, and Ukraine is no exception. Despite its emotional attachment to the West, Ukraine thus must learn how to live peacefully with Russia. Making Russia Ukraine's permanent enemy by joining NATO is to allow emotion trumps rational calculation. And how true is that statement? The guy worded it exactly what is happening there and the reality. And I am stunned that nobody paid attention. Perhaps Ukraine will be wise to learn some lessons from Vietnam's experience in living with China. Having fought China for a millennium, and France and the United States briefly, and allied with the Soviet Union against China from 75 to 89, Vietnam has grudgingly admitted that it can ill afford to antagonize China regardless of how powerful its external allies are. Hence, in the past 20 years or so, Vietnam has been trying to achieve a delicate middle ground between China and other external powers, i.e. the US, without declaring neutrality. Vietnamese leaders understand that the art of diplomacy is not to search for the emotionally gratifying, but the rationally possible within geographic constraints. A lot of wisdom in there. And as I have said many times, the sad reality for the West is there are no more statesmen and there is no more decent diplomats. This Ukraine fiasco is going to have a lot of repercussions, and the West is not going to be the same once the dust settles.